Welcome to Noble Warrior. My name is CK Lin. This is where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, thought leaders about their journey to master themselves and have greater joy, prosperity, and purpose. My next guest is the chairperson of JUCCCE, an NGO that has been pivotal in China's Green Revolution since 2007. She's the winner of the prestigious Hillary Step Award, and she was recognized by Time Magazine as a hero of the environment. Peggy has played an instrumental role in catalyzing the nation's strides in clean energy, ecocities, and sustainable practice. Welcome to Noble Warrior, Peggy. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for being here from beautiful Hawaii.
I'm super
Uh,
excited to be here. This is the nation of Hawaii, by the way. I'm living
mm,
a dream in a sacred land in Waimanalo, Oahu. So,
mm. Well, I mean, since you mentioned that, let's go down that rabbit hole right away.
yes.
What does it take to create a life of one's dreams?
Oh boy, I think to create a life of one's dreams is just about imagining it and feeling that you're already there. So, in my practice, both spiritual and professional, it's all about creating the future, creating from the future that you want. So pretending like you're Willy Wonka creating a chocolate factory, or James Cameron creating Avatar. And so really it's about weaving the threads, the details of a life that you want, but feeling into it. And I call this creating a sentimental memory of the future. So that's my trick.
Okay, so obviously we can unpack that further. Some people use vision boards, some people use affirmations to tap into that space.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do as a way to tap into that, future fulfilled type space?
Yeah, I actually have a whole framework and a methodology of how to do this. So
Let's hear it.
we
I love frameworks.
I know you do, CK. Um, so mine is called tornado leadership, and the reason is because everything in reality is a tornado. It's either creating a creative tornado or it's destroying a destructive tornado. And so some people might be familiar with a torus or a toroid or a donut or a bagel, right? And so this concept of a flowing magnetic, electromagnetic, multidimensional shape that's constantly turning in on itself. And from the middle of it, it creates this tornado and goes around and then goes up into the 0 point again and around in an infinite loop. We're essentially creating realities at every moment. We're not necessarily understanding that we are doing that. Some people feel like, oh, we're just living life. We're maybe a victim of life. Maybe we're just a small player in the environment, the society that we live in. But in my practice, I believe that the reality that you live in is the choice that you have made to pick that particular reality. And in fact, you are the creator of an infinite number of realities. So, what is a reality? Right? That is the first key to creating the future you want to live in is to understand, to be aware of what reality is. So, in my practice, a reality is simply let's call it a trillion energetic waves that add together. And each wave is like a detail that a sense might sense. So it might be the smell of the trees in the back, the birds chirping, the feral chickens doing whatever noise that they do when they're running around while I'm taking a shower outdoors in the jungle. I hear Actually, I can hear rain often, the drizzle or the downpour of rain that is touching the clouds, touching the top of the mountains here, creating the rainfall every morning on the top of our ahupua'a, is what we call it. The water flow, the whole system that surrounds the water flow. I can hear the rustling of the wind. So, all of these are energetic waves, each one of them. It's like you're weaving a quilt or a high thread count bed sheet, really fine luxury high thread count bed sheet with trillions of details. And so it's not enough in my mind to create a vision board. It's not enough in my mind to do affirmations. The trick is to create the details of living in a reality that is first person point of view, that is so compelling. It's more real almost than the reality that you are in now. And that's what happened to the protagonist, Jake, in Avatar, the movie, right? It was more real for him to be a blue, figurine than being in a medical pod. The second trick is to feel so excited about it, so filled with wonder. You're like Charlie getting that golden ticket to Charlie, the Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, right? Charlie and all the other kids were like, whoa, this is amazing. Oh my God. And they're running around like, like tasting the lollipops and slurping from the chocolate rivers and everything. That childlike curiosity, sense of wonder, is what drives you forward. It creates the momentum for forward progress. It's the momentum for change, right? It's that buildup of the into a climax of a beautiful, Beethoven symphony, for example, right? So the trick for creating the future or the world or the reality that you live in is simply that. It's really storytelling, the way that the masters of movie do it, right? So, for example, Dune, I love the second, well, this current version of Dune is just beautiful music that really moves my heart, moves my emotions. And the costumes and the details, the pauses to the action, I mean, everything was threads in this high thread count reality. Like I really felt in many times, like I've also read all the books, but I really felt like I could step into that reality. So I would say my practice and the practice that I teach my kids who are now 18 and 20 is to be able to be the best storyteller that they
Mm,
can possibly be.
mm,
Because a storyteller is somebody that uses imagination and uses emotion and then creates momentum around that reality. It's not a static reality. They know how to move it, flow. It's all flow, right? They can sense it. They can sense whether or not the flow is moving or if it's broken, if there's a block. And so that's really the practice that I would like to gift the world with tornado leadership. That's one
oh,
of the aspects of the framework.
I love that. Let me double click on a couple of points that I heard. Well, number one, I believe that our external reality is a reflection of internal reality. So the starting place is knowing what the future that you're creating with vivid details, as details as you can, that high threat count that you talked about, and also have the sensibility, the perceptivity of what it actually feels like to be in that future that you're creating now. Is that an
Yes.
accurate reflection of what you said so far?
Yeah, it has to be first person point of view. So a lot of times people make the mistake. For example, I'm an environmentalist. I've helped write a lot of white papers, a lot of scenarios, a lot of metrics, a lot of numbers that numb. The difference is being able to feel like you are in it. So it has to be first person point of view. It's not a descriptor like we want a sustainable life. We want an equitable life. We want inclusion. All of those words are not first person point of view, nor are they very emotional. They're not very heart based. And so the trick that a lot of people miss is how do you become a movie director versus a white paper writer?
Mm. I think it was Quentin Tarantino when he's how he shoots his movies is he knows his characters really really well, and then he knows the beginning and he knows the end, and he allowed the characters to co-create whatever the movie plot is gonna be to arrive from beginning to the end. So that's a little reflection as you were speaking.
I
So
love that. I love that.
So I gotta ask you a question before going to be a great storyteller, be a great movie director, and then enroll others to join your movement and so on. I'll click on that in a moment. How do you make sure that this is not coming from a place of grasping? because grasping, as Buddhist, the Buddha teaches us, grasping is a source of suffering. So how do you hold a really strong vision, a very vivid vision, as if you are, there already, and
Mhm.
not, grasp so much, be so attached that like, oh my god, my life, my reality right now isn't that, and there is that gap, and there is the source of suffering.
So I think the difference is understanding that we are already in the middle of an infinite number of realities. So there is a law of availability that is available to us. Basically, we already have all, people say we have all these now moments, right? They're already existing. So the trick is to understand there's potential realities and kinetic realities, right? So potential energy is like the snowball at the top of your mountain. And then once you push it, it starts rolling, you have kinetic energy. So the all that is nothing is really a lot of snowballs at the top of the mountain that you haven't yet pushed down the mountain. And then when you focus your intention, your thoughts and your feelings and your actions, then you start the snowball rolling. But once you have in your heart the understanding that you have available all of these realities because they already exist, then there is no feeling of lack.
Mm,
And then you're not grasping because it already exists. I can switch from one reality to another at any moment. It's just play, it's just following your excitement and your sense of wonder. And then
mm,
you are free. You're free to choose. And there's just abundant play. There's no grasping because there is no lack.
mm. Got it. So have a deep belief that this is already happening. This concurrent parallel universes, realities, whatever you call this, is already happening, and have that faith, that belief that, if I just continue on my path, this shall be. Is that what I'm hearing?
Let me, as you say, double click on that
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
it's so funny, like, because I moved to China in 2004. There's a lot of terms that I sort of missed and then I came back and people are using like it's been a minute or double click, and I'm like, what did they mean by that? Or shade, and like my kids who are much hipper than I are teaching me what these things meant. So it's very funny. Anyway, side note. So I'm going to give a little bit of nuance.
Mm-hmm.
Time is not like a path necessarily. The way that I view it is a card deck of moments, and there's an infinite sized card deck. So, an infinite number of moments that you are already in. The card deck already exists. You're not like producing the card deck as you go. It already exists. Every single card already exists. And you can change from one card to another at any moment. Now, some of these cards look a little bit more similar to another, and so it looks like one timeline, right? And some of them have probability weights based on your belief system, your self-limiting beliefs mostly, but based on your actions, the momentum of the actions that you are taking. There's higher probability that you are going to leap from this card to another card. But if you understand, if you have an awareness of how reality works, you can actually shift from one card to another quite rapidly. So I think the key to jumping from one to another is just simply knowing, not believing, not wishing, but knowing you are an infinite being, that everything exists. The other thing that I'm going to sort of take a side note, I'm going to double click even further, is the way that I like to describe time and yourself is that the moment that you choose to be in now, the card that you choose to be in now is a present, okay, a present moment that actually has attached to it, like bags, like a backpack, a different past and a different future. Okay. So what that means is when I choose to be a different Peggy or CK, I choose a different frequency, meaning a different high thread count, set of energy waves. I choose a specific frequency of a sentimental memory of a now moment. That moment has a different past and a different future. This is a little bit, you need to like rewind and listen to that 3 times. But because of that, the future now Peggy that I choose might have a completely different past. I've rewritten my past,
Mm.
and this may be a traumatic past, right? It may be one that I don't want, or one that I just, wanted to take a different path. I had a life choice that I didn't take, and I want to go back and I want to pursue a different life path. But this is a little bit mind boggling for people when they first start to see things, at least the way that I'm describing it. Not everybody has to prescribe to this, but if they do fall into this sort of way of seeing the world, then this is probably one of the most important lessons, is to understand your relationship with time, that you
Mm.
can write your memories and
Mm.
you can write time. And actually science is proving this now, that like everything is malleable where your memories sit, right? They're constantly changing.
Mm.
So that was a triple click, CK.
No, I love it. Keep at it. Let's go quadruple and quintuple and all that's fun stuff.
Cheers
So
to
the
that.
way I'm reconciling this in my mind is this, because we do talk about mindset a lot. The way I describe it is, our reality is based on the worldview that we have. So what was perhaps once traumatic, quote unquote, a negative event, quote unquote, I can have, let's say, a epiphany moment, an ayahuasca journey, meditation event, whatever the thing that allow me to see a different point of view. And now that traumatic event is now a gift to me. That's
Yes.
the way I'm interpreting that right now. And so therefore, the reality that I once had, I thought, oh man, this thing happened, so and so died, so and so stole money from me, whatever the thing is. And now I can look at it truly as a gift. Like, wow, what a teacher, what a gift. That's the way I'm interpreting what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's again, everything that I say, there's like multiple layers of nuance. So one way to view it is, for example, I'll use the story of my mother growing up. She was really
Mm-hmm.
hard on me. I think we have similar backgrounds. My parents went from mainland China to Taiwan, so I think you're from Taiwan,
I
and
am.
they were like, um, they were refugees of war, if you really want to call it. They don't use that words, but actually they were, right? They ran away from mainland China to Taiwan, and then there were immigrants in complete poverty to the US. And then she had me, they didn't even have insurance, so it was a really tough labor. So when I view the way she treated me, honestly, now looking back, I view her with compassion, and that changed everything. I really tried to view it from her point of view. Like, how is it that she was emotionally dealing as best as she could with her environment? And that compassion changed my memory. You know, reality is relative. So some people say, "Oh, that didn't change reality. She really still treated you, hard, whatever." But actually, reality is relative. And so that's one way to double click. Um, I mean, gosh, there's so many double clicks, triple clicks, quadruple clicks on and memories and time. Another one is like, let's say this podcast. Um, there's a woman in Norway that once listened to me on a podcast, and she said that she felt in her body thematically like an activation, and it sort of triggered something in her. And some people might say, "Oh, it inspired her."
Hey,
I'm
what
going
her?
to say
What?
that it was more than that.
Mm.
Inspired
Oh,
inspired
inspired.
her. That's like a superficial way to look at it. Another, if you double click on it, basically it activated a remembering of herself that was already there. And the frequency in my voice catalyzed it. It opened that like a key. It's like a portal that she went through to view herself, a remembering, right? And
I love
so
that.
the voice, even as I'm speaking, as you're speaking, carries frequencies that are keys. Some people call them wisdom codes, light codes. So oftentimes, because I'm an energetic healer, oftentimes when I work with clients, they they are getting information in the voice that they cannot rationally process at the moment that they're listening to me or taking notes. So I always tell people to listen to a recording of my session with them at least 3 times,
Mm,
because they're getting codes that will transmit into their cells and process at the pace that they need to integrate in order to fully become the potential of who they truly are. That is
mm,
remembering who you are.
mm. I love that. Oprah has a really interesting take on the similar thing as one of those viral clips. She mentioned, I forgot who it was, when you get the aha moment, often it's not the content. It's not something that you get like, oh, aha. It's more of a, oh, it makes so much sense. It unlocks certain things like, oh, it's a remembrance of the truth that we deeply felt inside of us. So I really appreciate the way you said
Yeah. I would say, like, if we were to double click, what is it, quadruple now? Okay, let's
it.
quadruple click.
Let's keep going. Yeah, sure.
So if you think of yourself as coming into this earth with a soul contract, and you've actually pre-programmed yourself with a lesson that you want to learn, and then in this experience, this particular story, you have free will to make certain choices.
Mhm,
You yourself, your higher self, are leaving a bunch of what do you call them, Easter eggs in your
mhm,
program, right? And there's signals or
mhm,
serendipity or
mm,
angel numbers or whatever, right? And you may choose to listen to that signal and act on it, or be completely oblivious to it because you were so in your mind. You weren't in your senses, your being, your cells, your antennae in your cells is not fully activated. And so I forget what I was listening to, A Stroke of Insight. My friend told me about a book called A Stroke of Insight that said our cells can receive trillions of energetic frequencies per second. And so, really, what you're to really fully appreciate the signals that your higher self, the Easter eggs that your higher self have left for you as little, signposts along your journey, you have to use your cells to really feel the trillions of information pathways that are being sent to your cells per second, the energetic frequencies that are being sent. Because your cells, your DNA, are antennae. And so the practice that I am in is simply to raise up my antennae, to activate them, and to pay attention to what the antennae receives, and then to process it. Where I think the world's right now, where a lot of people say we're as polarized as they ever could remember, is because we're not really listening to the nuance of what our antennae are receiving. Instead, we try to bucket with our mind everything into good or bad, when in actuality, there is no right or wrong, good or bad. There's only energy that is aligned with you or misaligned with you. Everything has a right to exist and must exist for all that is and nothing to be all that is. So everything, we should be grateful for its existence, but it may not be aligned to us. So
yeah,
that's nuance. That's discernment.
I appreciate that. Let me quote Shakespeare a little bit. So he said, "There's nothing intrinsically good or bad. Only thinking makes it so." Translating to your language, only your internal antenna's alignment, whether or not it's aligning to you or not. That's
I
kind
thought
of
you were
the
going to read
point.
me a sonnet.
A what?
I thought you were going to read me a sonnet.
I don't know the whole thing. I just know quotes here and there. That's all. Just what comes to mind. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I, I'm not Bradford. Bradford can probably give you a sonnet, but yeah.
Bradford Richardson. Hey, Jack. Okay. Yeah. All right.
So, okay. So let me ask you a question. Let's say I love what you're saying, and right now my sensitivity, my perceptivity is still quite limited, right? And I am practicing discernment, perceptivity, sensitivity, so that I can go deeper and really fine tune the nuance of, oh, what's going on with my body? It doesn't quite feel right. Let me sit with it for a bit, and then have finer and finer discernment and higher fidelity, right? Are there
Lord.
things that you practice as a way to enhance the fidelity, the resolution, the refinement, whatever word you use to heighten this discernment that you talked about?
Yeah. Well, you know that I have practiced since 1989 a particular Qigong lineage called South Shaolin Inner Energy, One Finger Zen Qigong practice. And South Shaolin Temple, well, Shaolin Temple generally, all of the martial arts came from the Shaolin Temple. This particular lineage was actually practiced in secret. So even other Shaolin Temple monks weren't necessarily allowed to practice this. And it's not the chi that is used for fighting or like, offense, right? I use it for healing, or this is how I was taught, and this is what I focus on. And a very simple exercise that I take people through, and I've taught kids as young as 8 years old, kids as young as two can feel it, on up. So this force, like Star Wars Jedi Force, is literally, it was inspired by this particular lineage, I believe. You can feel it. Anybody can feel it. So you can just start by doing this, like as if you're holding an orb, right? I'm trying to get this in the middle of your screen here, right? And I do it where I let people feel somebody else's energy as well. So somebody can, I'm trying to move my hand here. Somebody can put their hand on top and somebody can put their hand on bottom. Now, posture is very important. So, ideally, I'm there and I nudge every single bit of your posture because then you can feel it more. But every single person that is able to do this workshop with me, usually I lead a 2 hour workshop, but honestly, it doesn't, some people feel it instantaneously. Every single person can develop the feeling if they just literally just do this. So we are an electromagnetic etheric field. Let's just call it electromagnetic field. So what does electricity feel like? It feels like static, right? So some people's hair will stand up if you had hair on your arm or the back of your neck, right? Some people will feel tingling. Some people will feel pulsation on their fingertips. It's magnetic. So people will feel this like push and pull. They'll feel like a movement, when you have magnetic toys and you make it move and it starts to go on its own, right? That movement. Everybody is made up of this field, right? In fact, we are of one field. All of reality, all of time, all of matter, all of thoughts, all of emotion is just one electromagnetic, and I'm going to add the word etheric field that has different spots of more magnetism or less magnetic permeability. And so what happens is your thoughts are an energy burst, an impulse. Your emotions, right, are a huge electromagnetic wave. Your actions, force, right, is another wave. And so what happens is you then create these, like, let's call them tornadoes or whirlpools, whatever, that suck in all things that are aligned with that particular movement, the angular momentum of that tornado. So it's like, if you look at a tornado spinning on the horizon, if you go next to it, if you are completely misaligned, you will be fearful of it. So you will run away in the opposite direction and go into the basement. If you are curious about it, you might go towards it. But if you're not perfectly aligned with it, you will spin off if you get too close to it. You'll just be thrown off, right? But if you're aligned with it, then you go in, and not only do you go in, but you and every other cow and house and wicked witch on a bike and whatever, Superman's dad, etc., dogs, they all go at the same speed and the same momentum as the momentum builds, angular momentum. This is very similar to bikes drafting,
Mm-hmm.
right? With actually the fifth bike in a line actually works the least hard, but
Mm-hmm.
all of you together are going faster. And so this compound effect is actually what we're here meant to be here to learn together in this, earth playground experiment that we're in. So a lot of this sensitivity that you can start to feel then can be applied to elevating collaboration in groups. And this
Mm.
is the key to why I've been successful in helping China go green as fast as I have. Each of these 7 changes only took 3 years because I felt into this momentum and this alignment and felt where there's flow or blocks to flow. And so this it all starts here. It all starts
So
here.
before we go into the direction of business, I love that, by the way. And this is actually one of the reasons why I love talking to business leaders, entrepreneurs, because it's not just about, in my opinion, it's not just about, hey, let me do the work as a monk in a cave, on the mountaintop somewhere, and to go to be self transcendent by myself. But what I'm interested in is, okay, do those things and make changes in the world so that the greater the macro environment could be better. So
Yes.
before we go there, let me ask you a quick question. One of the things that I use, as you know, is plant medicine. And for the way I practice it, I see them as amplifiers of my consciousness.
Yeah.
And I can be a little bit more attuned, a little bit more sensitive to what's going on inside the body, inside my mind, as well as the outside world, right? Whether it's ayahuasca, psilocybin, whatever the thing is, right? So that's very useful for me because for me, I need something that's really obvious. And so I like ayahuasca. It's very obvious versus the subtleties of like, did you feel that? Maybe, maybe not. So, is there any tools that you can share that to help people who don't have the sensitivity that perhaps you have to so that they can, up their sensitivity a little bit and use that as a I don't say crutch, but as a steps to enhance their sensitivity along the way.
I'm going to first say that it is a myth that some people are sensitive and some people aren't. I do believe that a third of the population are highly sensitive, like me.
Okay.
But everybody is made out of this energy and therefore they are sensitive to it. But we have, at least since 4 years old, been trained to be in our mind, to be robots. Our whole education system is a factory education system, right? And to will our way through pain versus feeling into it or learning how to transmute it and to use it to sort of like slingshot off of. And so, first, I'm going to say everybody can learn how to be sensitive. Again, that is the key. Again, if you want, right? Then I will say that my practice further, what happens is once you start to do certain stances, um, generally speaking, depending on how sensitive you are and how diligent you are in doing this practice, I can give you one pose that you do for 15 minutes, building up to an hour. Most people before 6 months mark will start to build up this energy in your battery, like you're rejuvenating your energy. You are more, you're revitalized. It's like drinking coffee without the buzz, the bad buzz. And then what happens is you get an overflow of this, and your body wants to move. And if you don't resist that movement by trying to stand still in this one stance, your body will naturally start to move. autonomous movement. And that's how you get like snake movement, crane movement, dragon movement, etc. I happen to do a lot of snake movement. My friend Angela, my chi sister, does monkey style. Right? But so what happens is entropy. I think everybody learns in physics, right? That entropy is like change is the only constant, right? Everything is in entropy expansion because everything is constantly being created. We're telling new stories so that we can learn about ourselves through these stories. So the trick is not to resist the change, not to resist the movement. And then what happens is your body actually moves. So some people, when I heal them, even through Zoom, will start to shake, right? I can't remember if you moved. Were you moving when we did it? Or I remember something about your teeth.
Yep.
But like, remember that there was this one guy there at that party, like he was just like he was just moving all over the place, right? So some people will um release energy through burping, coughing, farting, crying, yawning, right? Some people will be like this, some people like, jerk or whatever because they're not used to the movement necessarily. But then it becomes smoother and smoother and smoother. And then you start to like it's very tangible is what I'm trying to say to answer your question. Like I have hundreds of videos by now of people moving even on Zoom when I heal them, send energy. And I'm just going to put up my hands right now. So if anybody wants to try putting up their hands to my hands and just experiment, you know, they will be able to feel the energy. So it's not an on-off switch as much as a build up, like a defibrillator that builds up. Okay. But so your question about for people who don't feel it tangibly, the truth is that like everybody can feel it tangibly. So even when I was at, I'm just going to put my hair up because this Hawaiian like noon is starting to, hold on a second. I'm starting to like, so we can edit,
It's all good.
edit this out. Okay.
All good.
Okay. Let me just, starting to get close to noon. I'm going to go to the beach after this, CK.
Enjoy.
This is where Obama lives.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
1 second. He just built a house here last year.
Hmm. And this is where you're living permanently?
Well, I have a home in Shanghai and a home here. So I go between my speaking engagements, Shanghai and here. But so, okay. All right. Welcome to nature. All right. What was the question again? I totally forgot. Sorry. There was
Helping those who are energetically insensitive to
not,
amplify their sensitivity through breath work
yeah.
or plant medicine of some sort, any kind of tools.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people talk about meditation. There's a gazillion meditations. One thing that you might want to do is feel into your heartbeat. So be really quiet. And I can feel into my heartbeat. Sorry, I'm going into automatic movements. So then what you do is you feel into the space between the heartbeats.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people are into the visuals, right? I think it's like what 83% of our senses are overwhelmed by our visuals. So sometimes it helps to close your eyes when you do this,
Mm-hmm.
just to remove that. But because we're so used to dopamine hits, we're used to the beat, but not the space between.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say start there.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, part of my desire these days is how do I go even deeper? And you
Yeah.
just share some postures, some movements, some practices that I
Yeah.
can practice to go even deeper, to pay even
Let me
deeper
let
attention.
me share something with you. Hold on one second.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me try to do something with you. Okay. Okay. By the way, I
Sure.
never mind. I'm sorry about the lighting. I look terrible because
You
the light
are doing just fine.
is too bright back there. But I wanted to share the Hawaii sky.
Mm.
Okay. So, is there something that we can gift CK right now? Okay, I'm pointing at your third eye, activating. Sending energy to you. And one of the messages I would give you is something that my chi master yells at us all the time
Mm.
is no mind. No mind. Stop thinking. Stop thinking frameworks, especially. Frameworks are limiting. Numbers are limiting, actually. They box you in. They're prisons of energy. They're prisons of potential reality. True reality is more wondrous than we can ever imagine. There's not just the rules in our reality, our logos, but there's so many different types of realities with different rules, and it would boggle our mind. But once we apply a framework to it, we limit ourselves. So you are using it as steps in the spiral
Mm.
to go quote unquote upwards.
Mm.
When in fact, all you need to do is remember you are already there.
Mm. Got it.
That's just because I know you a little bit. That would be my personal advice. And I'm just activating your third eye.
Mm. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
The difference between striving, seeking, to knowing, to creating. And what I got
Yes.
from you is, hey, I'm already here. I know exactly what I need to do. There's no more striving. There's no like out there. It's just, hey, I'm thirsty. Let me go get a glass of water. It's as simple as that. That's what I got.
It's just what is it that you would like to experience right now? And choose. And then follow your curiosity and wonder because you already have it within you. You don't need to build it or like grasp it,
Mm.
right? And then what happens is when you are able to feel the senses, the creative energy actually comes from the root in the sacral, the sexual energy. Sexual
Mm.
energy is like, it's much bigger than sex. It's about creativity,
Mm.
right? And so to be able to feel that activation in those areas in the pelvic region
Mm.
will also help you, right? So rather than resist or
Mm.
constrain or think of sexual energy in a very 3D way, limited way, think of it more as creation itself,
Mm.
birthing reality.
I love it. So I'm curious, Peggy. You're in obviously in the business world at a really high level, and you use this very liberally in your teachings, in your engagements. I've
Yeah.
seen you, at high level parties, and that's who you are, and it's great. So I'm curious, what kind of people resonate with your framework, with your ideas?
Well, what I always try to do is let people feel the chi first. And then almost everybody is like, whoa, what is that? I've never felt that before. I cannot explain it with my mind. I've never been told it exists. So with little kids, I'm like, hey, do you want to learn how to be a Jedi? Like I use different language, right? But at the Rockefeller Center at Bellagio, we were at a 30 very high level women conference. And one of the things that we ran into is we were not able to collaborate. Everybody had their own opinion from their years of experience and success. And the energies were not aligned. And so they actually asked me the second day to come in and do a chi circle. So I put everybody in a circle or a circuit, electromagnetic circuit, and let everybody feel the energy flowing between us and the differences between left and right. And so I would say everybody already is this. So, yes, they're already aligned to the fact that we are energy. They just need somebody to show them. And
Mm.
sometimes it's helpful for somebody with a resume that's, maybe uh, credible in the 3D world to show it to them
Mm.
versus somebody who's like, I don't know, like not in their normal, what do you want to call it? Like frame of mind, right?
Yeah.
And so it's helpful for somebody like me who has been successful over and over and over again, and somebody who's as old as I am, as an elder, to
Mm.
come and say, this works for me.
Mm.
Because then they see it's possible. And for me, in my practice, every day when I'm growing and developing my skills, a lot of it is somebody told me it was possible, and then I try it. And then I realize, oh, I can do it too.
Mm.
But I didn't necessarily have the imagination by myself to try it.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about a lot of things that you would not be able to read in books. Like what I just did with you, right? Is
Mm.
send you energy through a screen, right? To activate your third eye. Most people don't know what the hell that means, right? And they're like, what are you doing? But I can tell you, there was a senior executive in the automotive industry in Detroit that is one of my clients. And last week, I did the same thing. And now she is a sensitive, and we're reawakening her abilities, basically, that she already has. But she started to feel heat as if there was a warm fire
Mm.
in front of her. Like, when you're like toasting marshmallows or you're cold and you're putting your hands there, she literally felt that hot,
Wow.
right? So it takes a few minutes. Like, it's not an on off switch. I need to like build up like a defibrillator. But warmth in your hands and pulsations here is very common, right? Not everybody manifests the same because everybody's energy is different. But once I tell you it's possible and I show you or somebody sitting next to you that you also respect and they get into it, then you're like, hey, I want to try it. Right. So I often do this at, for example, World Economic Forum or the Economist summits or very high level stages. And I do this on purpose in full view of people so
Mm.
that the behavior becomes normalized.
Mm.
And so the second time somebody sees me heal them or somebody, they're like, oh, yeah, she says we can keep talking. And they like have an informal chat right next to me. Like it totally nonplussed about what I'm doing here because it's now normal part of reality
Mm.
for them.
Mm.
And so my goal is really just to show people that they are much more than who they think they are. And a lot of those superhero powers that you see in whatever X-Men or Marvel actually are very, you know, realistic. But because somebody told you it was a superhero and only that superhero can do it versus everybody can tap into it, everybody can play the piano, as they say, but not everybody can be, Chopin or Beethoven. But everybody can play. Everybody can learn to play. The piano was there.
Yeah, it's just a matter of dedicated practices to really familiarize ourselves with. I mean, I'm trained as an engineer, so I look at the world through the lens of skill acquisition.
Yeah. By the way,
Right.
I'm an engineer too. So I'm trained at MIT as an electrical engineer and computer science major.
Mm.
I went to McKinsey, was very in my head, did management consulting. I was a venture capital, early stage investor in China. I totally understand where you're coming from, right? And we had this talk before, I think. Like
Mm.
the key is to integrate
Mm.
both your senses and your mind But when your mind is too strong, then it becomes a prison for
Mm.
the senses.
Okay, so
And
let's talk. Let's actually go down that for rabbit hole for a bit.
double click, CK.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm letting you use that term, as many times as you want. Awesome. Uh,
It's fun.
yeah, you love it. Great. So somebody who's really in their mind and they hear this, they
Yeah.
want to open their mind, they want to open their senses, and you share some of the practices, some basic, the first step, the next step to do. Are there other ways, or are there other readings, schools of thoughts, retreats, practices that they can, you know, sort of look at the roadmap
Yeah.
as
I
they
mean, so
practice the basic steps that you just share?
yeah, I mean, there's so many resources out there. It really depends on where you are at stage of remembering yourself,
Mm.
right? So if I say the law of one or something, that is going to be inaccessible for most people, right? But if I say Bashar,
Hmm.
that's pretty practical,
I'm a fan of Bashar, actually.
right? Because that's
Yeah, he's
super
a he's
practical.
a master teacher. Like, he's such a good teacher.
Yeah. So I would say um, it really just depends. Some people just music, right? And it also depends on where your sensitivities are coming in from. My friend Fernando Garibay, that I have the pleasure of working with, was the executive producer for Lady Gaga's "Born This Way" and Whitney Houston's last song, and et cetera, et cetera. He is so sensitive that he can see a color and hear a sound, right? So for him, he uses music as a way to help people well, I'm going to use this word. He doesn't necessarily use this word, but transmute their trauma into something positive, into a creation of a work of art, music. And that can touch millions of people on airwaves, and I
Mm.
guess too. so so it depends on where you are at. If you are listening to this podcast right now, your higher self already planted this as a signpost for you to listen to.
Mm.
There is no accident. When people meet me, there is a reason why they're meeting me.
Mm.
And they may choose to listen to it and be present and really intentionally take as much information out of that as they can, or it will sit there dormant until they're ready. And they'll be like, wait, didn't I hear something in some podcast, some Hawaiian background that was poorly lit? Like, oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah, let me re-listen to that because there's something there for me, right? So it really just depends on you. I'm fairly obviously advanced, so I like, for example, Rebecca Dawson, and she channels like ascended masters, and she's talking about the new human, where the chakras are actually disappearing because you don't need them anymore, because we're actually much
Mm.
more nuanced than certain spots. Like, there's not just 144 chakras in our body. I mean, come on,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
um so some people might be like, what is channeling, right? uh but I think it's important to tell people what's possible. So,
Mhm.
for example, I was just writing down this list of abilities for my clients, so that I can say, well, here's some of the things that might be activated in you when you work with me, right? So the third eye, some people might not understand what the third eye is, right? But it's the ability to, let's say, receive images, let's call it, of something that feels real. It's basically a signpost, or it's a message from the cloud database in the sky, right? There is a cloud database in the sky that has all the data of all the realities. And so when people say that they're channeling, or they're receiving messages, or they're clairvoyant, I like to call it putting my Ethernet cable, plugging into the cloud database in the sky. You would
I
like
like
that,
that.
right?
That's very practical. I like it a
Yeah,
lot, actually. That's
I like that. Yeah,
awesome.
engineer. Yeah, exactly. See, got you right there. Yeah. So For me, like the Akashic records isn't language that I use, but some people use it. Like I like the cloud database in the sky. So you know, I talk about the how do you change your past, literally by revisiting that, but rewriting a different result. It's like you went to dinner theater, interactive dinner theater, and you chose a different path, a different storyline, right? Um, some people can, there's somebody, actually a few people, they were very eager to learn this, but they're now able to, without touching me, with chi, push me so that I'm either jumping back or my body's twisting around, doing, almost somersaults, if you will. One person can do it over Zoom,
Mm,
right? Some people call that telekinesis, I think. I call it chi, you know, chi practice. It's basically, if you understand you're an energy battery, then you can inject it like I was doing to you, and you can focus it like a laser beam, right? Some people can talk to objects, like I talk to crystals and, energetic objects, and I can activate their energy. I
mm,
can like wake them up, right? So this is, for example, a crystal that I've been holding here,
mm, mm,
right? And this is very active, right? And so there's all this information in this crystal, and a lot of people are like, what the heck am I talking about? But there's a lot of information embedded in this crystal. But the key is, how do you connect to it? And so one woman taught me that channeling, right, which is connecting to somebody else's consciousness, even a stone, even the sky, the weather, even an island that is an energy vortex, or water, or a person, um, or somebody in a different dimension. It's simply just dropping into the frequency that that entity or energy is in, right? So it's a little bit like when you do method acting. I know both of us are great actors, but we know what method acting is, right?
I
You
do.
dress like Meryl Streep talks about how when she dresses differently and she changes her accent, she just drops into a different. She doesn't use this word, but a frequency. She becomes a completely different person. So when you realize that we're all part of this cloud database in the sky, and every bit of that database is a different frequency, there's an infinite number of unique frequencies. All you're doing to connect to one part of the database or another is tapping into the frequency. Some people might call that empathy, like being social, right? Where you're connecting or being present. There's all sorts of ways to use this, right? And all of them are valid. All sorts of ways to describe it. All of them are valid, but some of them have more nuance and layers of discernment in them.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say, going back to the original question, those that are curious, those are, want to pull on the thread of curiosity. That's actually one of the reasons why I started the podcast in the first place, because I wanted to show people what's possible, and by interviewing people who are, I call them householders, right? People who live a normal life, they're not in a monk, in a cave somewhere, and just meditate all day. They have a family life, they have a business life, and they're into these type of development. It's very new, and so that we can have these very nuanced conversations on what's possible when you practice these things and bring that into your life. That's the reason why I do this. So thanks
Yes.
for highlighting that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much, I have a vast network like you do of people who are sensitives. And what one of the things that I want to do is make it safe for people to say that they are a sensitive and they have these gifts. And so because I'm of an age and of a stature that honestly I don't really give a shit if people think I'm weird or crazy, like I just tell people, like and I show people. I'm not like just saying it, I'm actually doing it, and it's tangible and it's visible. But for example, you can heal people with this chi without touching them. I regularly take out back pain or neck pain or emotional trauma. You can heal Earth, you can heal humanity, right? Just through this field, if you understand how it works, right? You can definitely tap into what is currently the highest probability, quote unquote, future moment, right? I call it divining, right? Some people call it, I know, uh, precognition, right? That's definitely a thing, right? As long as you add the word probability, highest probability, right? What has the highest probability or the greatest momentum timeline, right? You can definitely have claircognizance, which is just a sense of knowing, right? So because you're able to tap into that cloud database in the sky. Again, knowing of something that has the greatest momentum at this moment in this particular timeline. Caveat. So I told you about some people who can see colors and hear sounds, right?
Hmm.
Uh, all of the some people can speak to animals. I know many people who can literally speak to animals. I know one Maori man in New Zealand that was telling me a little bit about how he changed weather fronts. And of course, many people like Indians, native Indians, right, have rain dances, etc. So it's nothing new. It's just that I happen to experience it in real life. It's like, oh my God, it's raining terribly here, and we're in the middle of the beginning of this conference. Could you remove the rain? It's like whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And then all of a sudden, I was able to take off my down coat, go out in the sun with, a tank top. It was amazing. So once you see this, and you're open to it, and you approach it with a sense of curiosity and wonder versus skepticism, you will begin to notice a lot more possibilities than we ever learned in school.
Hmm. One of the things that in our men's group we talk about a lot is follow your discipline, whatever discipline that is, and pay attention to the happy accidents. In other
Yeah.
words, the synchronicities, the serendipities. Just pay attention. And one of the things I concretely feel personally is whenever I'm dedicated to a certain discipline, whatever stuckness that I feel disappears and I just get energized. It may not look like the outcome that I seek exactly, but nonetheless, momentum is generated, energy is generated just by following very simple disciplines.
Yeah, I think the word that you said I want to double click on, triple click, quadruple click is momentum. We've said it
Mm-hmm.
all a lot already, but people don't understand the importance of momentum in creating your reality. So
Mm.
that's the second stage of my tornado leadership. The first stage is creating from the future, not the past.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about how to do that. The second stage is really momentum over metrics.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people take a snapshot of, let's say, how China is doing on or the greening of China, right? And they do a lot of statistics, but they missed understanding the trajectory that China is on, in the momentum that it has built, how fast it has gone green, at what scale it has gone green. They missed that. And so individually, I remember it was in seventh grade English class. I had this personal little tit for tat debate with this guy who was like, you don't need to do anything. You can be aimless. You don't need goals in life. Just like chill and enjoy, right? And I'm here like a Chinese kid, and I'm like, what is he saying? I know this to not be true, right? Like intention. If you have envisioned a storyline for you, the future for you, then you can move towards it. You're creating. We are meant to be creators. We are creators with a capital C. We are the creator with a capital C. That is our whole job. We only have two jobs in this life. One is to create, right? So we can learn about ourselves. Two is to remember who you are. Already covered
Mm.
that, right? But what is creation if not momentum? Creating momentum towards a vision, right? The vision can change. You love Bashar. He says, look, live at your highest level of excitement at every moment, right? And towards a particular vision of your life. But then the hardest part is being able to not be attached to that vision, because the actual result can be so much greater than your puny little imagination in your brain can manage to eke out. So I you know, double, triple, quadruple click on Bashar.
Um, is there a fourth step before we go into the sort of the organizational movement making kind of a
For
thing?
leadership. So the first step, just to recap, is create from the future, not the past. The second step is momentum over metrics, to sense it, and tips for how to build it, right? And then the third step is really resonance, orchestrate resonance, which is balance, flow, and alignment of energies. So this is all about collaboration. It's all about the drafting effect. So if you're biking and drafting and you're not in alignment, then you're not drafting. If you're not moving and flowing, you're not actually pedaling, you're not in flow. If you're not balanced, then like obviously you're not going to be biking for very long, right? So that's a very simple, flat analogy, but orchestrating resonance is actually what the greatest leaders are doing. They may not call it that,
Mm,
but it's group resonance, so that you are creating this golden mean spiral, this tornado, upward spiral, creative spiral. And so learn from the great musicians, or, Beethoven and conductors, and then apply that to leadership. So the greatest leaders, CEOs, are not chief executive officers that run a company by success metrics or KPIs. They're chief resonance officers.
mm,
I have a whole like HR chart, and I redid all the titles for, chief marketing officer or chief strategy officer, etc., to like, if you really live the tornado leadership way of being, then you shift the roles of everybody in your organization as well.
mm. So in terms of who you are, Peggy, I'm curious. Men's group will have different sphere of influence. That's probably the easiest way to think about it. There's the
Yeah.
self, there's the family, then there's the organization, community, society, humanity as a whole, right? That's, for you, as giving all your gifts, giving all the capabilities you cultivated over the years, as a business person, as a healer, how malleable do you hold these identities? And then how do you, because you can do all kinds of things at all kinds of levels, individually, organization, society as a whole. How do you navigate the creativity, the intuition, that's pulling you in a lot of different directions? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of tornadoes that I launch all over the world, so I have a
Mm,
lot of projects going on at all times.
mm,
What I find is that when I was younger, I would be completely mind. I would be very, very strong in my mind. I
mm,
was like trained as a samurai to be a CEO, and I was a CEO at 27 by my dad. And I started one of the earliest e-commerce companies in Silicon Valley.
mm,
But now what I realize is, to be able to do the work that I really need to do at the scale that I need to do it at, which is ultimately to awaken humanity.
mm,
That's a pretty big, lofty goal.
mm,
I need to actually integrate. I need to be in alignment within myself. So it's like some people say left brain, right brain is like
mm,
mind and spirit. And I need to be authentically me.
mm,
I can't just be part me.
mm,
Right. And so when people said to me, this Maori elder who changes weather, I was like, how do you learn how to change weather? And so he's like, you have to remember who you are. I had no idea what he was saying at the time, literally. And he doesn't speak much. Right. So I'm like, I literally have no idea. what you are saying. But he gave me so many clues in very few words that I later was able to dissect it or double click, triple click, quadruple click into. But remembering who you are is how you become your authentic you. And that is, I like to use the analogy of birdsong. So I like cockatiels because I used to have one. If you're a cockatiel, but because you're Chinese, you are told to be a parakeet,
Mm.
right? In China, you might be told you have to pass the Gaokao, right? You
Mm.
have to go to Tsinghua,
Yeah.
Fudan, or whatever, right? If you're a Jewish son, maybe you need to be a lawyer or doctor or whatever it is, right? Chinese students at my age, when we applied to MIT, they're like, oh, you have to play piano or violin or both.
And play the tennis.
To the
Yeah.
T, all the
Yeah.
Chinese kids at
That's
MIT,
right.
piano, violin, or both. So the point is that if you're a cockatiel and you're singing a parakeet song, you're not attracting cockatiels. And then there's this whole friction because you got a lot of parakeets who want to mate with you, and this is like not comfortable. It's the equivalent of sexual violence or sexual assault, right? And on your body, that's friction, that's resistance and friction. And so the key to doing more in your life, I find, is to be more authentically a cockatiel or whatever bird song you are, and only sing that bird song. And the more you do that, no matter what pressure you're having from society, to like maybe you're a male, single male in China and you're told you need an apartment and a car in order to get married or whatever, right? There's like all these tropes. But instead, you need to like double click, triple click, quadruple click on who you are, the nuance of who you are, because everybody has an energetic fingerprint that is completely unique to them. There's only one CK in the entire universe, entire reality, entire multiple realities of all that is and nothing. There's only one CK. We have an energetic fingerprint. So feel into what that fingerprint is. And it's much more nuanced than Taiwanese guy that needs to be successful, whatever, earn lots of money and drive a fast car in LA,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot more.
And hence why I'm doing the podcast, right? To normalize these type of conversations so we can go beyond the matrix, so to speak, right? The presuppositions of what we should be versus what we could be or what we really want to be. You know,
Yeah,
who we really are.
yeah. And I'm
Mm.
I'm constantly being asked or told to maybe not be my true self
Mm.
my whole life. And for example, my starting with my mom, she was like, "Why don't you dress more like a girl? See those girls over there? Like, because I was a tomboy, and I'm very masculine, honestly. Like, I have a very strong masculine inside me, and so I didn't want to dress like a girly girl. Um, and then even now, I have people who are trying to protect me and advising me not to come out fully with my gifts. And there's a lot of sensitives who are in fear of being assaulted energetically because they are who they are. But I'm going to choose, I am choosing to believe in my own power, to create my own reality. And that is one where I can be who I am, and that I do not have to live in this fear, that I do not have to veil myself. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm very openly showing what might seem really crazy, like super crazy if you're not at all exposed to this type of stuff. I mean, you are, right? Honestly, nobody who's watching your podcast would not be open to this type of stuff, right? Let's just be honest, right? This is why like they would not find me here unless they were seeking. And so therefore they are ready. And therefore they should listen to this podcast 3 times to get as much download of wisdom codes as possible from my voice, but also from the words that I'm speaking.
So I have a question for you about that because remember who you are. There's a knowingness, but I also hear you say releasing the internal friction and the resistance, as well as you didn't say this word, but what I'm hearing is also um, to transcend, perhaps maybe that's the word, of the outsider point of view that's always trying to change who you are. So can you share with us a little bit of what that looks like for you?
Well, let me try to simplify it to
Hmm.
say ask yourself whether or not every single person that you meet, or a place that you're at, or a food that you eat, or a car that you drive, or a color that you wear, ask if it is energetically aligned with your higher self.
Mm.
If a person that you're about to hire, are they energetically aligned with the higher self of the company? Right? If the burger that I'm about to eat, is this really energetically aligned with my higher self? Sometimes it is. Maybe if it's organically, grass fed beef cooked with love
Mm.
and you eat it once in a while earlier in the day. um, so it's interesting now that I have the skill to ask that question. I'm asking it for everything.
Mm.
And it is so interesting. What direction do I face? Please put me in the direction I should face on the beach while I'm practicing chi.
Mm.
When I work with these stones, I
Mm.
ask, because they're, if you think of themselves as beings, then they are sovereign beings and they
Mm.
should be free. Right
Mm.
now the crystal stores and trade shows are a little bit like slave trade. So I try
Mm.
to encourage them to say, look, you are sovereign, you are free. Tell me where you want to be. Tell
Mm.
me where you want to be placed. And it will move my body and put it into a particular position in my room. And now that I'm listening to the signals, I try to do that of everything. I'm not great at it. I don't do it 100%. But for example, the other day, a little tiny bird feather dropped on the floor in front of my sink. I live sort of half outside, off grid.
Mm.
And you can see my entire like backyard is netted to prevent the gnats from killing me at night, right? And so I'm like, how did a bird feather come inside this netted area right where I usually stand in front of my sink? And so I asked myself, is this a signal for me? And then I asked a series of questions. So, like, what does this signal mean for me? And then I asked, where do you want to be? And it put
Mm.
itself on my altar, one of my altars, right? So this can, the simple answer to your question is start to ask every single thing that you do, everything that you surround yourself with, to the micro to the macro, what
Mm.
continent you live
Mm.
in, right? If the couch that you're sitting on is the right furniture, is it placed in the right place? Is the mirror placed in the right place? Is this aligned with my highest self?
Mm.
It's a really simple exercise. And the more you let your body respond, like, there's a lot of tricks. If you ever see somebody who like is doing this thing, have you ever seen anybody do this?
Yes.
That's like they're asking their body yes, no.
Oh,
Like
like
they're
muscle
essentially,
testing.
right?
Yeah.
Muscle testing, right? So I essentially do muscle testing, except my whole body moves.
Mm.
Like my whole body is a pendulum. People use pendulums, yes, no swinging, because everything is electromagnetic. And so you might see a pendulum swing like a circle, or
Mm.
the other way, or this way, or that way. Yes, no, you can program it. And
Mm.
that is because the pendulum you're programming to plug in to the cloud database in the sky. Your body is a pendulum because every single cell is electromagnetic. Your heart, you might have heard this, I think, from the Heart Math Institute, is like a 5,000 times stronger magnetic generator than the brain. It's 100 times stronger electric generator than the brain, right? And what's interesting is that it is pumping blood throughout your body. Your blood has iron. Iron is magnetic, right? It's all very interesting. But everything is magnetic. And so if you just let the magnet swing, then your whole body will move to orient itself, and you can program it, yes or
Mm.
no, maybe reframe the question, etc. And so, very long question to what was meant to be a simple answer. Is something aligned or not?
I mean, I like it a lot. I mean, like I said earlier, my intention is to live a deeper life, to be more attuned to who I really am. That's ultimately, you touch on this exactly. My overall intention is so that people can live an awakened life, be who they really are, sovereign with sovereignty, with agency. Everything that you said is perfectly aligned with my overall intention of this podcast.
Yeah, and I think what your questions are trying to do is double click, triple click, quadruple click again on these. Because, like, if you hear somebody say, remember who you are, like, even me, like, fairly late in my spiritual journey, I had no idea what this guy was saying, this spiritual elder who I knew he had a lot of wisdom for me. So, what I like as an engineer are like step by step instructions that I can then practice and then to feel like, oh, can I do this? Is this like, does this resonate with my body, my field? Can I, and then I practice it every day. I am very serious about practicing
Mm.
um, every single day and integrating. And I'm lucky in that, my mind is pretty strong. And so I take somebody's lesson and then I'm able to experiment. I'm able to integrate it into my practice very quickly. So it's not just knowing something, it's creating the momentum by integrating it into practice. So I think that this podcast has a lot of really simple tips for people, right?
I
So
well,
far.
actually, here's the thing, Peggy. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
Yeah.
Why is it simple? Because it fucking works, right? So why go through the complexity, the fancy moves, the fancy kicks, the flip kicks, all these things if you can just straight punch, like, you know what I mean? So that's what I like. So a couple of things I want to double click. All right, the heart of what you're saying, what I'm hearing you is ask yourself this question: is this aligning to me at
Yes.
from the micro, the smallest scale to the biggest scale?
Yeah.
One. Two, keep practicing the basics because at the end of the day, through the journey of practicing martial arts, you can probably attest to this. In the beginning, the teachers teach you basic kicks or the basic moves. And in the middle level, blue belt level, now it's get to like fancy kicks and stuff like that. And once you get to the black level and the multiple degrees of black belt, you go back to the basics because it fucking works, you know. So that's I like talking about the basics because that's to me is the path, the atomic unit, which will build towards mastery.
I'll say a couple other tips. One is to journal every sensation. And so when I was learning how to do energetic healing, I had to feel like, oh, there's pressure in my crown. There's like a pressure in my third eye. Oh, there's a tingling sensation, or there's here a pulse. I could feel heat here. So like journal, journal signals. So and then you go back and you'll realize, oh, I actually progressed really fast as a spiritual being. And by the way, I'm just putting my hands up. So if anybody wants to try it, although I'm having a hard time aligning to the screen. Okay. Yeah. So anybody can just watch this podcast and, and I'm just going to activate sending energy. So my fingertips are pulsing. And so we're leaving this as a signpost for people. All they have to do is put their two hands up to the screen and see if they feel something. I'm going to inject. Okay. So that'll be something that we leave in the podcast as a tip. Journaling, feel the sensation. Um, and then, oh, there was another one that I was going to say. What was the other one? Uh, Okay, well, it'll come to me. Yeah, lots of oh, I know what it was. Okay. The people who progress the fastest with me are people who are not learning.
Mm.
They're remembering. This feels right to me. I feel like I've done this before. This comes naturally to me. This is right. I know it is. And just double click on things that you remember.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So, what does it look like for Peggy? Are you, giving your intention to awaken the world? Does it look like you're gonna start more green companies? Does it look like you're gonna build a public platform with tons of followers? Does it look like you're gonna be making movies and use your kind of embedded in the story, like Star Wars kind of a thing? Like
Yeah.
what does it feel like right now?
Well, so for people who don't know who I am, which is probably everybody, since 2004, I lived in Shanghai, China, from the US. And in 2007, I started an NGO that was quite influential in starting the clean tech revolution in China. So it's literally called Joint US China Collaboration on Clean Energy, which is interesting in these times, right? And I was asked by the US government to bring in smart grid into China. So I also started the whole smart grid revolution in China, which changes the entire electrical grid. I was asked by the Chinese government at the same time to teach the first ever curriculum for mayors across China on how to build ecocities. So over time, I taught 1,000 mayors and central government officials. I brought in the top best practices from around the world to create a really interesting curriculum, which now online reaches hundreds of thousands and over time, probably millions of government officials. And we catalyzed green bonds. The China Dream slogan, the national slogan, it was actually intended to embed sustainable images like blue sky and green grass in nature into the default image of life in China that is thriving. And this is for sure true. If you go through any subway and look at the billboards, everything is definitely has that energetic vibration. Um, we we did 7 major changes, I'll say, across China. So now, because COVID, August 2020, I stopped doing on the ground work in China. Honestly, it was 13 years. I feel like we did the work that needed to be done to get China on a green trajectory, not just for itself, but as a leader of greening in the world. And now I continue to be a global speaker. So you will find me in, let's see, I'll be in Dubai at the World Economic Forum in October. I'm going to Singapore at the end of September to speak. I'm speaking in Madrid in October as well, etc. So I usually speak about sustainability and China, what to learn from China, and tornado leadership, what to take from this. Uh, I cut across all sustainability industries. So, and I have on the ground experience with leadership in government and companies and NGOs in China. Most people don't. Most people are just China watchers. So I have a pretty unique speaking platform. But now, because during COVID, I actually moved to the nation of Hawaii, a sovereign country that is being built in Oahu territory, 45 acres, off the back of President Clinton signing an apology resolution to the Hawaiian peoples. And we're literally creating a new country. There's a president, a vice president, ministers, et cetera, that I advise. And what I have learned is that the ancient Hawaiian system of ahu pua'a, which is communally stored water flows, watersheds, is probably the single biggest key to survivability for all of humanity.
Mm.
Is to create conscious communities that communally stored watersheds. And so I'm learning, but I'm also now working to create what we're tentatively calling an international center for island resilience. And
Mm.
this is on the back of helping create a disaster response um, with um, with a very large company, which is not to be named, but their disaster response unit in the nation of Hawaii for the Maui wildfires. So
Mm.
Lahaina burned down. It's a very sacred place. And my team went in on the ground the next day and helped set up the emergency response center in the Lahaina Civic Center, the Joint Command Center that President Biden visited, pulled remains off the, wildfire coal, set up, created drone maps of culturally important areas that need to be restored or preserved or whatever, starting to map the watersheds in that area, and helped with food delivery, Starlink setup, etc. So a lot of comms and tech. So we want to use that to create a living laboratory, if you will, here on these 45 acres with Native Hawaiians that have an Aboriginal Indigenous culture that is sacred and sophisticated. And to use this as a test bed for creating something that you can imagine can be drop shipped on flat packs in containers to any island. But then also to learn about cultural resiliency and cultural appropriate engagement with communities in disaster response, and also inner resilience. So, a lot of the energy work that we're talking about needs to be built into disaster response and preparedness, not just the tech that we're also playing around with. So, we installed Hawaii's first experimental cell tower that has a 5G and 4G on it. So, it's like a portable mobile cell tower that we can ship in disasters. Um, we shipped something called Ethor to the Marine base here that does experimentation for all Marines across the US that will be used here in the nation of Hawaii. It's called Ethor, and it's like this military grade all terrain vehicle that has instant like power, solar power, 5G, 4G, satellite, microwave, etc. for communications, water from air technology. So all the stuff that I love because I'm an engineering geek and I'm an environmentalist and I worked on scaling this China scale. Now I want to do it island scale and appropriate scale it in a way that is appropriate to the indigenous Aboriginal cultures. So that's one of the big projects that I'm
I
also
love
working
that.
on.
I love that. I really appreciate how you take your superpowers in environmentalism, engineering, technology, science, civil, I don't even know how you call it, design of the city, and energy healing into
Yeah,
everything that you do. That's a beautiful marination of everything coming together.
yeah, it's
Um,
fun.
one thing that Bradford actually really applaud you for is your ability to get into really influential networks and establish yourself very quickly.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you this question in terms of making social change. What's your thought on it? Is it more bottom up, grassroots, da da da, to the influential, or is it top down, or is it some harmonious method in the middle? In terms of just being a visionary, a creator, right, and then causing change in a scale and accelerated way. Like, what's your thinking behind it?
So it depends on the society. So when I was working in China, everything has to do with the government. And
Mm.
so one of the best pieces of advice that I got from the Chinese side in creating this first public dialogues between US and Chinese government officials on clean energy was in order to get the highest level Chinese person to speak, I needed to get a foreign government official, active or retired, and they would
Mm.
match peer to peer. And
Mm.
so my secret to creating the tornado and to create the initial energy was to inject a high title of government officials. And I can go into how to work in China at great length. That's a different podcast, different topic.
Right.
But now in, for example, Hawaii, or as they call it, Hawaii,
Hawaii.
or
Yes.
yeah, many, I would say, like in the US, it's actually, I would say, homesteads, conscious communities
Mm.
that are capitalized in a way that celebrates what abundance really means versus an imprisonment of capitalism. So usually there has to be
Can
a
you double
conscious,
click on that? I'm not. Yeah, there's a lot of
yeah,
words. Say that again
a
one
lot.
more time.
So one is like having a conscious community at the center. The energetic frequency, or the fingerprint of that community, is established by a couple
Mm.
that may or may not be a romantic couple, but they are balanced in divine feminine, divine masculine.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I said earlier, sexual energy is creative energy, it's because, if you get into birth, right, you need male and female sperm and egg, right? But it's also energetic, divine feminine, divine masculine, yin, yang, Shiva, Shakti, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So one is understanding that a community is not a piece of land. It's an energetic frequency. And that couple needs to be future oriented.
Mm-hmm.
That couple needs to be able to imagine the Willy Wonka chocolate factory that they want to create. Here, it's the president, Uncle Bumpy, we call him, has been in this fight essentially for 30 years to reestablish sovereignty
Mm-hmm.
and dignity and culture of and wisdom of the Hawaiian peoples. He's like the Nelson Mandela of Hawaii.
Wow.
So, so one is, you have to you're starting to see, if you really pay attention, a lot of couples buying up land, large pieces of land, and they want to like create a farm, they want to create a homestead, they want to create a conscious community, whatever words you want to use. John Dennis Liu has, I think, a network of, I think, at least 27, 30 eco restoration camps, they call
Mm.
them. John Dennis Liu. And so whatever you call it, the point is that it's a homestead that is self-sufficient, and it's living in harmony with the natural way, the natural order, in harmony. And the people in it are aligned with the vision, the energetic frequency of the vision that this conscious couple has created. Otherwise, they shouldn't be there. Another great conscious community that I visited was Findhorn, or Find Horn, Findhorn, in the very tippy top of Scotland. Domenher is another example in Italy, right? So, but the problem with a lot of these is the lack of capital and the lack
Mm-hmm.
of tools. So what happens is they're all reinventing the wheel, which is very frustrating for me to see. So I'm hoping that we will create essentially a nervous system and tools that we can just localize and ship to different communities ultimately,
Mm.
to make them more resilient, adapt, to be able to respond better to changes. And that includes technology, but it also includes culture preservation, and allowing them to thrive and shine like beacons, and also inner resilience, so that when people do encounter a Lahaina Maui wildfire, they're able to come back, they're able to transmute the trauma in some ways.
I love that. Let me just zoom out for 1 second. I really love the approach how you differentiated your approach to making that social impact in China versus in the nation of Hawaii. Um, in the coaching framework would be meeting people where they're at. Chinese people love status. Great. Let me give you someone of equal status and so that you can let's go. Whereas
Yeah.
Hawaii is a very different, right? Very, what do you call it? Homestead level. And then from there, and then co-create together that way. I really appreciate, that approach.
And part of that is, again, sensing the energetic frequency of who you're working with, who you're collaborating with, what the land, the Aina, AINA, is calling you to do, with the bird song, literally, of the birds, right? The energetic vortices of the mountains, the water, the islands, right? All of this has an energetic frequency that you need to adapt to when you're working in that area. And that's why a lot of times when you just come from technology and you're trying to scale, the biggest, I think, blind spot is how to localize. So when
Hmm.
I taught mayors in China how to build eco-cities, I would go around the world to find best practices. I would, create little videos of them so they didn't have to travel there. I maybe would bring people to lecture from that area, like a deputy mayor of London or what have you. But the trick is, does this localize to the cities or villages that I'm teaching? So, for example, when I taught bike share before bike share was the thing, before China became the largest, bike shares in the world, Chongqing is a city of, I think, 32, 35 million, depending on which day you're sneezing, right? Um, they were like, "Have you ever been to Chongqing?" I go, "Oh, not yet. Sorry, but I would love to go." I mean, I've been to the outskirts of it, but not the city. And they said, "Well, it's very hilly, so bike share wouldn't
Mm.
work."
Mm.
So, as somebody who has the best intentions of using technology to improve the lifestyles of humanity, the living standards of humanity, I have to use my senses to understand how to localize that to the land and the culture, the energy of that community.
Yeah. Do you anticipate, because what I'm envisioning the way you're articulating is you're not gonna do a prefab cookie cutter. Here's, and let's just commercialize everywhere with all the lands. What I'm hearing is you're creating, an engineering term, an operating system. Here's the best practices, and here are all the different things that kind of all fit together. But let's adapt to the different localities based on the need. So that's my understanding. Did that accurate rewording of what you said?
So some of it is infrastructure, some of it is like cultural,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yep.
so, for example, there are granite mountains and granite islands and coral islands,
Mm-hmm.
for example. So there might be a lot of differences.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them might be just offshore, some of them might be in the middle of the ocean, like Hawaii, so harder to get to, right? And so shipping is an issue, infrastructure.
Yep.
But there's also like again, double, triple click through the different layers. Networking protocol. I used to work in ISDN modems,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like networking protocol. So there's layers, right, that go up to the application layer from the hardware layer. And so for localization, it's the same thing. So we have to go down or up.
Now, so my follow-up question was going to be this. So I have it roughly correct, but my follow-up question was going to be this. Do you anticipate, because let's say if I'm a chief in the Yawanawa, I'm a chief of the Yawanawa tribe in the Amazon jungle, you know, naturally they might be skeptical about outsiders trying to tell them or help
Oh yeah.
them or support them, teach them what to do, right? So how do you anticipate people eagerly embrace, like, hey, show me all the tools you got, then I may pick and choose
No,
which tools
no,
or do you
no.
anticipate a lot of, a long-term enrollment process to so then they trust you?
Well, boy, that there's a lot of answers to that. So the guy who basically led the disaster response for us has been
Mm-hmm.
working in disaster response since 2005. Jeffrey
Mm-hmm.
Schweitzer. He's the guy who like rappelled down a helicopter to set up comms after Hurricane Katrina, or
Mm-hmm.
went to Ukraine after they were bombed to set up comms there. And um, he said that this disaster was unprecedented. How many years is that? He's been working in disasters for a long time. He's never seen anything like this. One, in just how big and swift it was, right? A whole town burnt down in hours because of the winds, and it was a fire, and it was an island. But also because of the way that people responded on a community grassroots level. They showed resilience versus waiting in a parking lot after a hurricane to get FEMA handouts. And in fact, they really actively said, we don't want government involved. We reject government handouts. I mean, there's a lot of history to that, right? There's a lot of colonialism and et cetera, et cetera. But so I think the key is you have to create decentralized, community-led disaster response or resilience bases, hubs, resilience hubs, community-led resilience hubs. It has to be. There's a woman named Olani Wilhelm that just left Biden's the Office of Science and Technology. And before she left, which was 2 days before I had dinner with her, she wrote, I think 3 weeks before she left, she wrote an engagement handbook to engage Hawaiians because there was no, because it's Hawaiians are not considered a tribe. The native Indian tribes, they have like handbooks for how to, with a protocol for how to deal with engaging government and tribes, but they don't have them for Hawaiian. So she is part Hawaiian and she wrote this. And during the Lahaina recovery or response, they started to print these out, give them away, abbreviated version, laminated, so that people can, like, especially the government, can learn how to be more sensitive. And actually, because of this, they sort of pulled back, like FEMA sort of pulled back a little bit in what you call it land with technology and say, here it is, welcome. So one is, it's very important, the fact that this center, International Center for Island Resilience, will be based in the nation of Hawaii with Uncle Bumpy, who is basically a Nelson Mandela for Hawaiians. He's like seventh or eighth generation descendant of King Kamehameha, depending on, how you count the bloodlines. And so you have to have cred, street cred, right? You have to have people vouch for you that you are welcome here with your technologies. And then you
Mm.
have to do technology transfer and knowledge capability building, right? And so we're going to invite the Marines to come here, even though the history has been be afraid of the military because the military took over Hawaii, right? But so I think this is going to be very historic that we're in talks with the Marine captain who is in charge of experimentation for all Marines to come here to do simulations of disaster response so they can learn what is appropriate culturally. And they want to do that too. They want to do it the right way. So it's just a matter of building the bridge. And to build the bridge, you need people who are sensitive to the different energies and then to come up with something that can meet in the middle.
Reminds me of the cultural scientist of the Avatar movie.
Mm,
Yeah. To be culturally sensitive, to introduce and to build that bridge. Even though
yes.
the movie took a whole different direction, but the intent of having the cultural study there
Yeah.
is a good
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. I did a TED talk. One of the TED talks that I did in Shanghai was cultural bridges, the service jobs of the 21st century, something like that. So it might be worth your listeners to also look at, because I really believe cultural bridges, and especially people who are of mixed heritage, are the key to peace,
Mm,
because they're, by default, they're going to have to be more sensitive to the different energies.
mm.
Otherwise, they can't survive.
Yeah, especially at least for me, I'm sensing a lot of disharmony in the macro right now, and it seems to me it's becoming more and more polarized. And even though on the micro, all of my friends, myself, we all practice everything that we've been talking about, So my micro system is quite harmonious actually, but the macro from all the news media that I can hear, that I can sense, is very polarized.
Yeah, I would just stop listening. I stopped actually watching news. So I'm lucky that I'm plugged into a network that I get firsthand news from people who actually are in the trenches, so to speak. So I feel like I know what I need to know. But
Mm-hmm.
remember, the media is a narrative, is feeding us a narrative that is very polarized, dualistic, and is not correct, honestly, when it comes to China. I know
Mm-hmm.
because I live in China
Mm-hmm.
part time now, right? And a lot of the stuff that is being presented by media, without getting into a whole nother podcast subject, is simply not accurate. And it is creating the tension, which forces a reaction of like, imagine if you're bullied in school all the time. At some point, you're going to hit back, at some point. And this has just been a really, really, really long journey to get to this. And the media is not helping. So
Yeah.
stop listening to it because the reality, and I'll give another like nugget here for listeners. Reality is simply your emotional response.
Mm. Can you say more?
So if you look at the US China geopolitics from the US side, let's say a hawkish side, then you emotionally respond with fear, with anger that territory or industries or economy is being taken over, the fear of something else rising and taking away your power because there's only lack, right? Or whatever. I mean, you can keep going, right? The narrative is filled with emotion of dualism. It's like Batman versus Joker, Superman versus Lex Luthor, right? There's always in US movies, there tends to
I
be
love
a,
that you bring superhero references in this. That's amazing.
but like if
Yeah.
movies, American movies, there's always like the good guy versus the bad guy. There's very little nuance. Whereas if you look at Chinese movies, it's always about the struggle. And there's no real clear good guy, bad guy. It's just like suffering, and it's almost like karmic suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the lessons of resilience. It's really the resilience and heart. And it's like a big mess. And like usually they aim to make everybody cry with a lot of big box of tissues by the end of the movie, right? Like there's no happy ending. There's no Disney happy ending. So for China, that's the media we're being fed internally. And that
Mm-hmm.
means like be more resilient. Look, all these other people have gone through tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy, and they're still there. They still exist. So you can do it too. Life is hard, but buck up. Like that's the lesson that most people are getting. And so Chinese people are really resilient and they suffer a lot more than what I see peer groups go through in the US, frankly. A lot more. But they still exist and they accept it. They accept the suffering as part of life, as part of the journey, right? It's much more nuanced. So, so when I say your reality is just your emotional response, for the US, they're creating this whole reality that China is the enemy. And so therefore it is. And therefore China has to react in a certain way. And so they have created a reality. The media in the West has created a reality that is now becoming more and more true. China, on the other hand, interestingly, is completely surrounded by a digital wall. And so, unless you're like bilingual, like I am, or yeah, unless you're bilingual, you don't really care to go on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat or whatever because they're in English. You can't understand it anyway.
Mm.
Even if you watch the TV, you have to wait for somebody to subtitle it so you can, watch it,
Mm.
friend, in Chinese, right?
Mm.
And so the reality within China is actually, I think, a much safer environment
Mm.
because, I mean, look, this is very nuanced. So people are
Of
going
course.
to
Yeah, yeah,
sorts of
of course.
but this, but that, blah, whatever. But generally speaking, what I'm trying to say is that there is, I believe, a very intelligent, well meaning government that is trying to create a thriving China dream for all its citizens, not just the 1% few. It's very
Mm,
important that all the way to the rural West, the little farmer in the podunk village that takes like 3 hours to just drive through the mountains to get through, that person should be have, equally thriving lifestyle as the person in Shanghai that moved to the city. So that dream is then portrayed in the media, and it gives
mm,
hope. A
mm,
lot of people who visit China say, wow, all these people are super optimistic, even though it's not the best living standard for everybody, right? It's still
mm,
very poor, mostly. But boy, they seem really optimistic about the future. Why is that? Well, because every single day has been a better day, and we celebrate the, improvements in the media. If you look at
mm.
the papers, a lot of people say, oh, it's propaganda because it's like all good. There's a good reason why it's all good news. It's because it gives people a good feeling of progress and hope that they themselves the next day and their children in the next generation will have a better future. In the US, a lot of people I know quote all the time, oh, this is the first generation that they're not expected to live as long as their parents. There's so much pessimism, right? So there's a lot of nuance to this. And yes, you could say, oh, there's a lot of mental illness issues, in China, et cetera, and blah, 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 blah. But look, I'm just trying to make a point that your reality is governed by your emotional response, and you are in charge of your emotions. And so if people can just understand that, then they will shift their emotional reaction, the way that they observe a particular scenario, and then they will act differently, and the other person will act differently too. And that is true of the story that I first started with, which is my mom, right? I changed my emotional reaction to my quote unquote past, and I chose to view her with compassion. And now we have a different relationship because my emotional response to her has changed. And therefore, she could feel that energy. It's safe. So now she acts in a way that is safe.
1,000%, Peggy. I mean, a big part of, I mean, everything you say, I'm definitely in alignment with. A big part of what Noble Warrior. I mean, I'm a nerd, and when it comes to neutralizing our negative self talks, reinforcing positive ones, to me, what that means is just how do we engineer our narratives that empowers us and let go of the ones that we don't, and using very engineering speak about that, so we can look at it from a very micro point of view, like how do I relate to myself, how do I relate to my friends, what do my friends mean to me, how do I relate to my company that I built, what does that mean to my community, society, humanity as a whole, nation, all those things, right? It's just different fractal, but in my opinion, just these are different narratives. How do I, and how do we um, find harmony in the narratives that we pick and choose that works for us? And I love, how we started this conversation. We're gonna end with this conversation. Is this ultimately you are the creator of your life, and how do we get there? We talked about the micro, the personal, right? The energy, harmony, and everything, and the tornado leadership. And then we talked a little bit more macro of companies and society, nations. We cover a lot. Thank you so
We
much.
This was a lot. I hope, this is why you have to listen to this 3 times to fully comprehend what I said. But also, when people are ready to receive the message and really integrate it, they will listen to the words in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
But it's all an adventure. Life is an adventure, and just experience it with joy, and just wonder, sheer wonder. And that will lead you to what is truly aligned for your true self, for your higher self.
Yeah.
So I hope you get something out of this.
Oh, 1,000%. Thank you. I mean, the reason let me just double click on that real quick. The reason I want to talk to people who are householder but who are also have a deep spiritual practices, plant medicine, whatever the thing is so that we can navigate in the space of the material and the spiritual. And for me, that's the kind of person I want to be. I don't want to just live in a cave and in a mountaintop somewhere. I want to be with the people and actually doing something about the environment, the macro that I see. And this is my best way to contribute. And if people resonate with this, with the likes of Peggy, fantastic, great. If they don't, fantastic, great. And then we're going to live a great life with joy and purpose. You know, that's what I'm here to do.
Yeah, I love that. And again, the key word that you said is resonate. So everything that somebody says, I learned this lesson fairly early on because I used to take criticism really like to the heart, like literally a dagger to my heart. And then I realized, look, not everything somebody says is aligned with me or resonates with me. And so I can use my discernment to choose to integrate that into my practice or not. And so that is the free will that we have, even with his podcast, is like not everything I'm going to say resonates with everybody, and that is okay. It's okay. But I hope a lot of it does.
Absolutely. It does for me. Peggy, is there anything I should have asked that I just totally forgot? You want to bring it in?
Oh, I mean, there's so much that we could have talked about, of course, but I think this was a lot. I'd be surprised if anybody actually listened to this in one entire fell swoop, one sitting. But I think like just have the belief that there are people that you can find or within yourself the ability to energetically be more yourself. Like this is the most important practice that I have is to view everything as energy. And so there's a lot of resources out there. I hope people go out and find them. I think a lot of people that you are probably interviewing are energetic healers like me. There's people that will resonate and people who won't resonate, so choose who you work with very carefully, but please do it. Please work on yourself. Please work on your energy. Please work on strengthening your energy shield. Please work on shining your energetic light. Please work on building up your energy. Please work on being your true colors of your energy. So with that, thank you so much, CK. This was
Peggy, I just
amazing.
really acknowledge you for being who you are, from the dedication, from the work, from the mastery. We cover a lot of bases. I love the fact that you're able to zoom in on the micro and zoom on the macro with such articulation. You even brought in some superhero references. I just love our conversation. Thank you so much for being here on Noble Warrior.
Thanks, CK.
All
Bye
right.
from
With
Hawaii.
that, let me complete.
Mahalo.